Hello friends, my name is Manny and I'm a comic artist and writer. WEBTOON Canvas is WEBTOON's self-publishing platform that allows you to set your own publishing schedule and still reach an audience of millions. I've been publishing the WEBTOON Canvas y Canvas de WEBTOON for over 3 years now and currently have several comics available on the platform. But my main series are The Mind's Eye, which is a psychological drama and LGBT romance that explores various mental health topics such as schizophrenia. And my other series is Earth Eaters, which is an action fantasy drama that takes place in the same universe, just later in the timeline. And while I'm currently revamping Earth Eaters for a relaunch later this summer, you can still read the current version of the comic on Canvas right now. So, there are a lot of things I wish I would have known before starting out on WEBTOON Canvas. Like little tips and tricks you learn along the way. And I would love for the opportunity to share that advice with anyone who's looking to do the same. I want to walk you step by step through the WEBTOON production pipeline, and I've created this video to be widely applicable to the comic making process in general, regardless of what you are using to create it. But I am going to be working in Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio has been my daily driver for years now, and thanks in part to its seamless integration with WEBTOON, it has a lot of helpful features that really help streamline the comic production process. The written version of this tutorial is available on Clip Studio's tips website, and I'm actually entering it for tip of the month, so if you would like to check it out, it's also got some extra sections with helpful diagrams and resources. I'll leave a link to that in the description box below, as well as timestamps to help you easily navigate between these sections. This video is definitely on the longer side, but I kind of just wanted to make a comprehensive tutorial covering everything you might need to know about making a webtoon that you can even refer back to if you need it. That being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. Also, this is my first video, so please go easy on me. Alrighty, my friends, and so one of the first questions you might have is, what is the best canvas size to work on when creating a webtoon? Looking at Webtoon's upload requirements here, the maximum dimensions for files are 800 pixels wide by 1280 pixels tall. And Webtoon actually has a handy feature now that splices files whose dimensions differ from these parameters. But if your canvas is more than 800 pixels wide, there's a chance it will be resized, compressed, and it may reduce the image quality. With that in mind, let's go ahead and create a new document. Here in Clip Studio Paint, you'd select File, New, or press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-N. When we open this window, we see that we get several canvas options here. But as the name suggests, the Webtoon option is optimal for creating a webtoon and taking full advantage of the vertical scroll format. Among the presets that Clip Studio gives us here, Webtoon 3 and Webtoon 4 might be some good options when starting out because their widths are multiples of 800 pixels. Personally, I set my canvas to 1600 pixels wide by 25,600 pixels tall at 300 dpi. Because it's always a good idea to make your canvas a little bigger than your final image will be to ensure quality. So keeping in mind the final file width will need to be 800 pixels when uploaded to Webtoon, I double that. Additionally, because the final file sizes will be 1280 pixels long, I also try to keep the length of my files at multiples of 1280, or in this case 2560, so that I can gauge how many files I'm going to end up with. The maximum number of files allowed in any one Canvas episode is 100 files, and the total maximum file size is 20 megabytes. When using this Webtoon Canvas option, Clip Studio also creates a helpful preview of each of your files so that you can keep track of the overall flow of your story. To toggle between these files, simply double-click each page, You can also rearrange the pages by simply dragging and dropping them. And throughout the drawing process, you can also preview your drawing as it will appear on a mobile device using Clip Studio Paint's on-screen area feature. All you gotta do is go to the View menu and then click On-Screen Area Webtoon 5. This shows you what your comic will look like on various mobile devices, which is what Webtoon reports that most of their users read their comics on. And as you can see, as you scroll through the canvas here, the preview window will follow. You can change the settings for this window here, or select that option again to toggle it off. Finally, some canvas artists choose to create their comic in the traditional page format and simply reformat those panels for vertical scroll episodes on Webtoon. Though drawing the comic in vertical scroll from the get-go allows you to take full advantage of things like the expanded gutter space or impact panels, this method can be really useful, for example, if you also plan on, say, hosting your own site for the comic, posting it page by page, or doing a print run later down the line. Alright, great. So now that we have prepped our canvas, let's start drawing. Whether you're going to be drawing digitally or traditionally, the comic production pipeline generally consists of the following steps. You've got thumbnailing, storyboarding, and sketching, which we'll be covering in this section. Then we'll move on to inking, coloring, effects, lettering, and finally formatting and exporting. So before storyboarding individual panels, a lot of artists start by thumbnailing the layout of their overall page. Thumbnails are loose sketches that establish the flow of your panels on the page. These are typically small drawings with very minimal details, drawn in quick succession to churn out several iterations. When laying out your panels, here are a few helpful things to keep in mind. 1. Webtoons are meant to be read one panel at a time to create what Webtoon calls a cinematic experience with their vertical scroll format. So based on a canvas size of 800 pixels wide, Webtoon recommends having at least 200 pixels of vertical space between panels. 2. For transitions involving location and scene changes, Webtoon recommends having at least 600 pixels to 1000 pixels of vertical space between panels. 3. Speaking of gutter space, or the space between closed panels, this is the perfect place to put things like weather indicators such as leaves and snow, manga patterns such as sparkles, bubbles, stars, important motifs to your narrative, or even impactful dialogue that you want to stand on its own. 4. Because you're not bound by the limitations of the traditional comic page, try varying the height, width, shape, and positioning of your panels, using size to indicate the importance of certain shots. 5. Try playing around with things like impact panels, which are open or borderless panels that take up the entire screen. These types of panels are perfect for highlighting critical moments in a scene, such as the introduction of a new character. Some artists combine the thumbnailing and storyboarding phases, but I like to do those thumbnails on a separate document first to look at overall flow, then move on to the storyboarding phase on my final canvas. It's in this phase that I configure my panels, map out my characters' blocking, poses, and basic expressions, and place speech bubbles. This is super important. I would highly recommend planning out where you will be placing your speech bubbles in this phase before you even begin sketching, so that you do not have to struggle to cram them in later or cover up any beautiful artwork that you're going to draw. On that note, Webtoon recommends limiting speech bubbles per panel to 3 or less so that you do not overcrowd the panel. So, once you've effectively laid out your page, you can start adding all the fun details like hair, facial features, clothing, props in the sketching phase. In general, I would recommend using a pencil subtool or brush subtool to sketch out your panels. And when erasing parts of the sketch, use a soft layer such as this one to lightly feather down the edges so you don't lop off anything you might want to refer to. You can also use any brush as an eraser in Clip Studio by clicking X on your keyboard or selecting the transparent option beneath your color swatches on the bottom left-hand corner of the color wheel. And even if you're not going to be drawing your background completely by hand, I always recommend still sketching out your character's surroundings and their placement within them, because this helps ensure natural feeling placement and perspective when the background is added, regardless of whether you are drawing it by hand or using assets such as brushes and even 3D models. Finally, when preparing to ink your sketch, I would recommend lowering the opacity of that sketch layer to 10 to 18%, or essentially as low as you can set it without straining your eyes, so that you can focus your full attention on your line art. Alright, and next it is time to panel our webtoon or create the finalized panel borders based on our sketches. Clip Studio has a lot of great tools for paneling your comic, but the most widely used is probably the frame border tool, which can be found near the bottom of your toolbar or by clicking U on your keyboard. So once you've selected the frame border tool, simply click and drag your cursor across the screen to instantly create these self-contained panels. This will automatically generate a folder for each frame that acts as a layer mask of sorts, and inside each folder you can create individual layers, but everything you draw on them will be contained within the frame. To quickly move between frames, you can select the folder to expand it, or you can use the Operation subtool, shortcut O on the keyboard, and you can quickly toggle between them by simply selecting them. You can also use this Operation subtool to resize and transform the frame by selecting its border. Using the Operation tool still, you can adjust the frame further by selecting these control points. You can also add and delete control points by right-clicking the border. To split your frame, use the Cut Frame option within the Border Frame subtool. All you gotta do is drag it across the frame and release in your desired direction, and voila! To draw impact panels and other open panels outside of the established frame, simply draw in a layer outside of the designated folders. Alright, so let's move on to the inking phase. You probably heard it more so referred to as the line art phase or lining. Inking just refers to the ink used to create line art in traditional printmaking, but in our case we will be inking with digital pen. I typically ink in a G pen or turnip pen just because it has a little bit of taper, but you can toggle the taper in other settings by clicking this wrench icon for any of the pen subtools. Once you're happy with your sketch from the previous phase, use it as a guide to line your drawing. My biggest tip here is to close your line art. Take the extra few seconds to go ahead and join those lines, because it's going to make the coloring process a lot easier. And another thing that can make the overall process easier is by using vector layers. So unlike raster layers, vector layers do not lose line quality when resized or otherwise transformed. To create a vector layer to do your line art on, navigate to the Layer menu, click New Layer and Vector Layer, or you can simply navigate over here to the Layers panel and select New Vector Layer. You can also easily manipulate the objects on a vector layer by using the Operation subtool discussed earlier. So pressing O on your keyboard, you can see here that we can edit the main color, brush size, and even brush shape of all the objects just by selecting it here. You can also transform vector lines directly by selecting them, similar to the frame border tool. And you can also add, delete, and manipulate control points in the same way using the tool as well. My favorite part, however, is the vector eraser. So we can use this to easily clean up entire lines, portions of lines. As you can see here, the different options on the menu allow you to delete differing portions of the lines. So WEBTOON recommends adding some form of color to your comic, as color comics are typically the ones they find perform the best on the platform. When choosing your art style for your comic and deciding how you're going to render your drawings, I would definitely suggest to opt for a style you know you will be able to keep up with. What I mean by that is you're going to be producing large quantities of panels every single week potentially, and so you may not be able to fully render out your drawings to the same extent you would a detailed illustration. So when I'm rendering my comics, I typically stick to flat colors for my character art, basically letting the line art and analogous color palette bring the drawings together. I will sometimes moderately render out close-up and extreme close-up shots, especially if they're important moments in the story, but for the most part I find that flat colors perfectly suffice while still maintaining the mood of the scene. Because of this, I am able to create pages nearly 3 times as fast as when I rendered out each panel the way I did in the beginning. I highly recommend finding a system such as this that works for you, as it will allow you to maintain a consistent posting schedule, avoid burnout, and just spare your body some of the extra stress and promote wrist health. Some quick coloring hacks. Once you've selected a color palette you'd like to use, you can save it in the color set tab here by right-clicking any cell and just selecting add color. From there, you can easily eyedrop your saved colors at any time throughout the illustration process just by clicking them. Also, if you would like to adjust the hue, saturation, and luminosity of your colors on any layer, simply click Ctrl U on your keyboard to bring up the HSV slider. You can also use the slider in the form of a clippable correction layer by selecting the Layer menu, New Correction Layer, Hue, Saturation, and Luminosity. And lastly, layer blending modes can be a really useful tool for quickly adding light and shadow to your comic. These modes can generally be broken up into the following categories. Yes, I know, right? There is actually a rhyme and reason to them. When shading comic panels, I typically use low value, so darker, desaturated blues and purples on multiply mode to add faint cell shading to characters. When lighting scenes, I typically use high value, desaturated yellows and oranges on screen mode for basic highlights such as hair highlights, and then I use those same colors on glow dodge mode for more vivid and powerful light sources such as direct sunlight. So in this section, we're going to go over helpful effects that are particular to Clip Studio Paint. First are effect lines. So whether you're drawing, just an emotional conversation or this big epic fight scene, you can use effect lines to really capture your reader's attention and direct their focus toward a significant action, expression, character, or prop in a scene. Clip Studio has several pre-made effect lines that can be found in the Material menu. So Material, Manga Material, Effect Line. You can also search any of these in the search bar at any time. To apply them to a page, simply drag and drop. You can then rotate, resize, and transform the material using the Operation subtool. If you'd like to customize your effect lines, Clip Studio also has the Streamline and Saturated Line options under the Figure subtool. To use them, simply select the tool, click where you want the center point to be on your canvas, drag your mouse in the direction you want the effect to emanate, and press enter. If you'd like to apply blur effects, erase parts of, or otherwise modify your effect lines, all you gotta do is rasterize them by right-clicking on the layer and selecting rasterize. You can also do this to other layers such as frame borders and vector layers to further adjust them. Just keep in mind that after rasterizing, they will not be able to be manipulated using the original parameters. Another useful and relatively new effect is the liquefy tool. So you can use this to correct a drawing by warping and reshaping a specific part of the image. Just press J on your keyboard and trace over the part of the image you would like to warp with your brush, and voila! The warping will only be applied to objects in the current layer, and as you can see, there are a couple different settings like push, expand, pinch, so definitely play around with it. Lastly, possibly the most widely used are the blur effects. So Clip Studio has a couple awesome blur effects available under the filter menu, blur. But let's focus on radial blur, motion blur, and Gaussian blur. The radial blur effect allows you to select a point of origin and causes all the objects on the selected layer to either radiate toward or away from that point. After accessing it through the filter menu, simply drag and place the red X where you would like the point of origin to be. This effect is useful for sunlight filtering in, and it also be useful for objects such as the effect lines we just discussed. The motion blur effect is excellent for things such as leaves, dust motes, snow, flower petals, and other weather elements you want to depict moving in a designated direction. Finally, the Gaussian blur effect is what you probably think of when you hear the word blur. This effect uniformly blurs all objects on a selected layer and is excellent for backgrounds or other elements you want to be out of focus. For more accuracy, you can also blur edges manually with the blend tool set to the tool property blur. This is what I use to soften some of the edges on the multiply layer I use when cel shading characters. And a final tip here, if you are unsure of what strength to use with the Gaussian blur tool, think of your panel as a cinematic shot, right? So typically in cinematography, the closer the camera gets to the subject in focus, the blurrier the background becomes. For example, here is the same image framed as several different shots with varying levels of blur applied to the background. So as you can see, as we move from the medium long shot to that close-up, the background starts to blur as our subjects demand more focus from the camera. Alrighty, my friends, we are reaching the end of the comic production pipeline. Let's do some lettering, where we're going to add word balloons, narration boxes, and onomatopoeia to our comic. So first, WEBTOON recommends using a font size between 12 to 30 pixels for quote-unquote standard text, such as most dialogue. Though this number will of course vary depending on your canvas size, DPI, and even your font. All things considered, the general rule of thumb is to make your text readable on both desktop and mobile devices. Personally, I have found that this means making most speech bubbles about 1/4 to 1/3 the total width of my canvas. So when working on the canvas I specified before, that is 1600 pixels wide at 300 dpi, I use a size 14 font. Before jumping into technical specifics, let's quickly go over some general rules of thumb for word balloons. So for speech balloons, you typically want the tip of the tail pointed toward the speaking character's mouth when they are speaking, and the tip of thought balloon tails pointed toward their head when we are listening to their thoughts. If a character's dialogue occupies multiple balloons within the frame, you typically do not need tails on all of them. If they are talking off-screen, the tail can be inverted in their direction. For narration, you typically want to use box-like shapes without tails rather than ellipses. If another character is talking, you can overlap these speech bubbles to help your reader further distinguish between them. Additionally, attaching the balloon tail on the side of the balloon closest to each respective speaker and the tail pointed away from the other balloon toward that character can help the tail placement look more natural. To use Clip Studio's text tool, simply click T once on your keyboard. The tool can also be found here. Once selected, you can simply click anywhere on your canvas and start typing. Then, once you are finished typing, simply click the check mark and it creates a transformable text box. You can then free transform your text, or if you would like to scale it uniformly, you can simply hold the Shift key or select the Keep Aspect Ratio checkbox. To create a speech balloon, you can use the Balloon subtool by clicking T again on your keyboard or navigating to the tool here. If you already have text typed out, you can place a balloon on top of it to encapsulate it, and it will actually merge the two. Alternatively, you can create your balloon first and place text inside it using the text tool again. I prefer this method as it automatically centers the text within the balloon. You can customize everything on this panel, like the line and fill color, the brush shape, and to adjust the border width, use the slider marked brush size. The curve balloon tool allows you to customize your balloons by selecting the points of a freeform curve like this. The balloon pen tool allows you to customize the balloons even farther by drawing the shapes freehand. You can move and transform the balloons using the operation subtool just like with the frame border and vector objects. Use the balloon tail and thought balloon tail tools to create tails for spoken words and thoughts respectively. Clip Studio gives you several options for the shape of your tail, including spline, which looks like this, straight line, pretty straightforward, and the polyline. You can also draw your own tail using the balloon pen tool. Alright, so let's export our files. So there are several ways to do this. We're going to be focusing on the ones I believe to be the most convenient. First, let's revisit the WEBTOON upload requirements. So the maximum total file size is 20 megabytes. The maximum number of files is 100. Each file needs to be 800 pixels wide by 1280 pixels tall. If not, the WEBTOON UI will splice it to these dimensions. If you're working in a program other than Clip Studio, I would recommend exporting your canvas at 800 pixels wide. As far as the length goes, you can let the WEBTOON UI do its thing. And if you're pushing that file limit and getting close to the 20 megabytes, I would suggest exporting it as a JPEG or a smaller file type rather than, say, a PNG. But if you are working in Clip Studio, they make it super easy and convenient. You can actually just do it straight from WEBTOON here, select Upload from Clip Studio Paint. This will take you to a separate tab which will trigger this pop-up. On the prompts here, we're going to select Open Clip Studio. This will open a list of our recent Clip Studio files. And from here, we simply select our comic by double-clicking it and selecting OK when asking if we would like to export it. And voila! Clip Studio will splice and auto-populate your comic files into the WEBTOON interface. So it's super simple. Before posting your episode, you will have the option to preview it on both PC and mobile, and I highly recommend doing this. As myself and a lot of my friends too have said the same thing. This is where we find like continuity errors, typos, and other things we didn't catch previously. The creators notes section here is a nice place to greet your readers, thank them for reading the episode, put quick reminders like upcoming schedule changes, things like that. But if you're wanting to deliver an important announcement and want to ensure the majority of your readers can see it, I would recommend including it in the actual episode as part of the end card we discussed earlier. Finally, if you would like to manually export in Clip Studio, it's still a super easy and convenient way to do it. So all you have to do in Clip Studio is go to File, Export WEBTOON, and this will open a panel which allows you to specify your desired file format, name, and scale. It also allows you to divide your episodes vertically into 1280 pixel files or any other dimension you would like. Once you have exported your file, simply click the Select File to Upload on the WEBTOON interface. This will open a File Explorer window where you can select your newly exported files and upload them to WEBTOON with no hassle. And just like that, we're done. Alrighty, my friends, I really hope these tips were helpful to you. Remember to check out the written version of this tutorial for more helpful information. I've got some extra sections in there talking about things like title cards and end cards, as well as pre-production tips like character design, storytelling. I'm also thinking of doing like a loose part 2 to this video. Sometime a little later this week it would be released, kind of going over some of those things, and a lot of it is generally applicable to just writing, character creation, and storytelling in general. So if you'd like to see that, please let me know. But for now, I hope that everything in this video was able to get you started, and I just really hope you go for it. I hope you're able to take all those ideas that feel like they've been swirling around in your head and are able to share them with the world someday. I'm a firm believer that everybody has a story to tell, and being able to share it with the world through platforms like WEBTOON is really just such a blessing. Anyway, I don't want to get too sappy, but thank you so much for tuning in to my first video. Technically my first video. I currently have some original music on the channel right now. I'm gonna be releasing more soon. Shameless plug, sorry. But yeah, I was really nervous about like sitting down and talking, at first at least, but once I push through that, I'm really just kind of excited to share more art, animation, music, even just tips, talking about things like I do in the mind's eye, just mental health tips, talking about living with schizophrenia, talking about transitioning and other LGBTQ topics. Yeah, I want to make this just kind of like a safe space for creative minds and curious people, in the same way that I aim to make my comics as well. So if you would like to see more content like this, please feel free to subscribe and stick around. And if the video was helpful to you in any way, please consider leaving it a like. And consider supporting me on Ko-Fi, where I do commissions and have a little sticker shop, or on Patreon, where I post early access updates for my comics, as well as bonus content like literally every other day. I love my patrons, they are awesome, so thank you to them, and thank you to you. I will see you next time.